Did you know that the Earth originally had one continent and one ocean? That one ocean surrounded that single continent. And this theory was started in the early 20th century by a German, and he was ridiculed for it. And it took till the 1960s till this theory was accepted as fact. And did you know that the Bible, the book of Moses in Genesis 3,300 years ago, wrote about a single continent and a single body of water? Welcome, Catholicos, Catholics, Orthodox Christians, all who seek the truth. This is Peter the Melkite with you today. So let us get going with this topic. So we're going to go over the various, should be a short video today, maybe half an hour, I'd say. So we're going to see that science actually says there was only one continent. And now we have 7 continents. Now, if you're Christians, 7 is a very significant number, from 1 to 7. Even in colloquially, people say the 7 seas, and that's divided into different Arctic oceans and so forth. But now let's deal with the one continent and the one sea. So we'll start with the science first. The science, which in fact is true in this case because it matches with the Word of God, and something which is unbelievable that almost 3,500 years ago it is written against all observable facts around the world that there was only one landmass and one ocean. So we'll start with the Smithsonian article, when continental drift was considered pseudoscience. So there was a German scientist, he was ridiculed for advancing the shocking idea that the continents were adrift. But actually he said the continents were one. And then they split apart and drifted apart. And this is his name, Alfred Wegener. And this is him. He was an adventurer as well. And so basically it was a century, this article was written in 2012, so in 1912, that's why they're saying a century ago. It was a century ago that Alfred Wegener proposed that the continents had once been massed together in a single supercontinent. And then they gradually drifted apart. So he was, and it says here, he was right, of course. He was, of course, right. Continental drift. The more recent scientific term they use for it is plate tectonics, the mechanism basically of how the continents separated. Plate tectonic theory are now bedrock of modern geology. But in Wegener's day, geological thinking stood firmly on a solid earth where continents and oceans were permanent features. So we'll continue here. So he was basically ridiculed, made fun of. What a nut! What a freak! So not only the foreigners, even German geologists made fun of him, called him delirious ravings of this guy. The British ridiculed him. The Americans, it says here, came down hardest against continental drift. They call it Germanic pseudoscience. And the main reason for the attack was because Wegener did not present a mechanism for the splitting of the one continent into different continents. How did that happen? That was their main attack against him, that he did not know the mechanism. The fact is the fact, but he did not present a mechanism, so they denied the fact. Anyways, the critics had said he had not presented a plausible mechanism for the drift. So what did he do? He provided 6 of them. And one of them includes that foreshadowed the idea of plate tectonics. So it says here the turnabout, like they rejected his theory basically till the mid-1960s, until finally science accepted his theory as fact, because the scientific method by that time advanced. So we're going to go through, and this is basically from the U.S. Geological Survey website, and it shows you, and this one continent, Alfred Wegener called it Pangaea. We're going to go into the Wikipedia article for Pangaea in a second, but this is the one continent, as you can see here, there. That's the continent Pangaea, which is supposed to have existed 250 million years ago. And it shows you here the gradual separation of the land mass into further separation, and finally, this is where we are today. That's from the U.S. Geological Survey website. And these are the 7 continents on planet Earth, like the 7 days of the week, the 7 days of creation. Anyways, so here's Pangaea. This is, again, we're going quick. You can spend probably years studying that if you wish. Pangaea. So the word comes from, so the Pangaea was a supercontinent, and it existed basically about 250 million years ago. And it is during this Mesozoic era, so around 250 million years to 86 million years ago. So it's the age of reptiles and the age of life basically on Earth. And it started formed around 250 million years ago, started breaking up around 175 million years ago. Whether we accept these numbers as fact or not, it doesn't really matter, because what it could take millions and billions of years for the Earth to accomplish, God can accomplish in a second. But it doesn't really matter, because the fact is the fact. There was one giant continent. And it says that Pangaea was centered on the equator and surrounded. So that one continent was surrounded by the super ocean Panthalassa. And we're going to see that. So this Panthalassa was a super ocean which surrounded Pangaea around 250 million years ago. And this Panthalassa ocean, that one body of water, was about 70% of planet Earth. Again, you got the 70% for the water, 30%, 3 and 7, 30% for the land. So the origin of the concept, again, here's Dr. Alfred Wegener. So he died in 1930. So he came up with the name Pangaea, and derived from the Greek pan, for meaning everything or all, the whole, and Gaia meaning earth. So the whole earth, the whole mass, all of the land. And then the formation, it says there may have been several other supercontinents before Pangaea. So the one is called Columbia, which is between 2 billion years ago, and one called Rodinia after the Columbia. Again, that's about 1.1 billion years ago, but then that's up and separated around 750 million years ago. And from that separation came Pangaea. Now, Rodinia and Columbia, so we see it. So Columbia, again, it was proposed in the year 2002 that it is thought to have existed about 2.5 billion years ago to 1 billion years ago. 1.5 billion years ago. And then after that came Rodinia. Now this is kind of interesting, which again formed one single mass. Rodinia, meaning to give birth, is the name of the supercontinent. It had most or all of the Earth's landmass. Rodinia existed 1 billion years ago. And it formed parts of the older supercontinent Columbia. Now, later this continent fragmented, assembled into Pangaea from 250 million years ago to 170 million years ago. In contrast, now this is important, in contrast to Pangaea, which we're mainly talking about, little is known about the exact position of the history of Rodinia. Now, the thing is with this, unlike later supercontinents, so unlike Pangaea, which is the first supercontinent, Rodinia itself was entirely barren. There was no life, no vegetation, no nothing. It existed before the colonization of dry land. Life colonized dry land. It was before the formation of the ozone layer. So even before the ozone layer, this Rhodina existed, had no life, no vegetation, no nothing. It's barren. So because it was exposed to ultraviolet light and so forth. So it is Pangaea was the first land, this one land mass, which life started on. And this landmass was surrounded by the super ocean, the one body of water called Panthalassa. So Panthalassa is also known the Panthallassic Ocean, and it was the super ocean that surrounded the supercontinent Pangaea during the Paleozoic, Mesozoic transition around 250 million years ago, to occupy about 70% of the Earth's surface. So we see that there was one land mass, and that one land mass was surrounded by one body of water. Pangaea is the land mass, Panthalassa is the water. 70% is water, 30% is land. There was no life in any supercontinent before Pangaea. In Pangaea, life started, that one supercontinent, which matches what the scriptures say, as we will see in a second. So that's basically my quick introduction. Very, very simple. Science adheres to, declares that there was one continent, one supercontinent called Pangaea, and that one supercontinent was surrounded by one body of water, one super ocean called Panthalassa. So now let's go into the book of Genesis, and we're going to go different translations. We're going to go the Septuagint, the Vulgate, the Latin Vulgate, the Septuagint, which is the Greek translation of the Old Testament by the Jews before the birth of Christ. We're going to go to some of the Targums, a couple of Targums, which are the Aramaic translation of the Old Testament. And I have here as well the Syriac, Aramaic scriptures. So let's just do a quickie here, because that shows you like the divine inspiration of the scriptures. So Genesis, like my previous video on snakes with legs, because in Genesis, God curses the snake, removes its legs. And we went through that video, watch it, where scientists talk about a gene which is there but being turned off. So it will no longer generate legs, but scientifically, snakes had legs, and then suddenly they disappeared by turning off the mechanism, which is the curse of God in Genesis. Again, when did any ancient man see snakes walking around with legs? Didn't exist, but it has it in Genesis, in the book of Genesis. So now we have as well in the book of Genesis, God saying that there was one land and one ocean, which was up to the 1960s ridiculed and denied by the scientific community. But, God knows more than the scientific community. He might not declare things in scientific detail, but what is important is the fact. So here we go, in the book of Genesis chapter 1. So this is verse 9, 10, and 11. So number 9. And God also said, let the waters, so remember, plural. Plural, why? Because the continents were broken up. So there were waters around different land masses. But so let the waters that are under the heaven be gathered together. So they're getting all the waters together into one place. And let the dry land appear. So if there's one body of water, there must be one mass of land, one continent. Because if there's more different parts of different continents, then there's different oceans, different seas. But there's one body of water that immediately means one mass, one continent. So he said here, gather together into one place, not multiple, and let the dry land appear. And it was so done. And God called the dry land earth, and the gathering together of the waters he called seas. So the gathering together of the waters he called seas. And then in verse 11, and he said that the earth bring forth the green herb and such as may. So now we see the supercontinent before Pangaea was barren. Pangaea's life started. And here we see after God brings one continent and one ocean, life starts to sprout on the land. And that's from the Vulgate version of St. Jerome, the translation of the Old Testament. Now this one is from the Jerusalem Bible, but I have the original Jerusalem Bible, which is really not my favorite translation, but the one online here is the New Jerusalem Bible. So it's pretty much identical to this one here, at least for this portion. So he says again, God said, let the waters under heaven come together in a single mass. And actually, there's a footnote in the Bible itself, in the New Jerusalem Bible. It says the Greek word here for mass, a single mass. It is a single mass. In the Hebrew, it is a single place, but it still means the same thing. It's a single mass, meaning a single body. In the Greek, in the Hebrew, it is a single location, a single place, but it still means the same thing. So it says a single mass, and let dry land appear. And God called the dry land earth, and the mass of waters seas. So the mass of waters, which is a single mass, he called them seas. And God said, let the earth bring vegetation, and so forth. Now, let's go into the Septuagint, which is the 70, which is the translation of the Hebrew scriptures into Greek by Hebrews. They were living in Alexandria. They translated the whole scriptures, which was basically taken as the Bible of the early church. And again, that's Genesis chapter 1. And God said, let the water which is under the heaven be collected into one place. Panthalassa here. And let the dry land, Pangaea, appear. And the God said, and God called the dry land earth, and the gathering of the waters he called seas. And then again God said that let the earth bring herbs. So again, Rodina was barren. There was no ozone layer. There was nothing. Pangaea, life started on that one continent with that one ocean. Now, before we head to the Targum, we're going to go look at quickly here the Aramaic translation of the Syriac Old Testament, which is very ancient actually, and it says basically the exact same thing. And it says here, and God said, let the waters that are under the sky be gathered together again in one place, and let the dry land appear. And it was so. And God called the dry land earth, and the gathering together, so it's a double emphasis, the gathering together of the waters he called seas. And God saw that it was good, and he said, let the earth bring forth vegetation, and so forth. So that is from the Syriac translation, which is used by the ancient Church of the East, and that's their official Bible. And now finally, we're going to go into the Targums, which are the Aramaic translations of the Old Testament, which the Jews read in the temple, not in the temple, in the synagogue while they were praying. They used it more than the actual Hebrew scriptures in their discussions and so forth. So Targum Jonathan of Genesis 1, it says here, and the Lord said, let the lower waters which remain under the heavens be gathered together into one place, and the earth dried, and the land may be visible. And the Lord called the dry land the earth, and the place of the assemblage. So the assemblage, bringing together the assemblage of waters, he called the seas. That is from the Jonathan Targum of Genesis. And then one last one is the Onkelos, I don't know how to pronounce this, Onkelos Targum, again of Genesis. And God said, let that water gather under the skies in one place, exposing land. And God called the land earth, and to the gathering of the water he called seas. So that is the Targum. So we've seen science talking about the Pangaea, one continent, one super ocean, so one super ocean, one continent, and that was until the 1960s till finally the scientists accepted that theory, and they came up, instead of the name continental drift, meaning giving the impression that the continents somehow floated apart, but tectonic plate theory, which using the tectonic method, with the tectonic plates, the continents were moved apart. And we've seen all the scriptures talking with all the different translations, making it clear that there was one continent, one ocean. And life did not exist on the previous any supercontinent. Like it says, Rodinia was barren. There was no ozone layer. Everything would die. Only with Pangaea, that one land, that finally life came into that land, matching exactly what Genesis says through Moses almost 3,500 years ago. And just in case you might be wondering, there was no evidence for Exodus, there is no evidence for Moses, there is no evidence for nothing. That is false. That's from the Biblical Archaeological Review, Fact or Fiction. There's here. This is an Egyptian stele. I don't know how it's called. So it's dated from 1220 basically BC, which is around just after Moses left Egypt, and it talks about Israel. Israel is wasted, his seed is not, meaning the defeat of the Israelites by the Egyptians, which means the Egyptians knew that there is Israel and the seed of Israel. So it is not a made-up thing. And there is actually an article in this with an Egyptologist, and he basically goes through all the evidence from Egypt, and he reaches the conclusion, it's around the 13th century BC, so around 1300 years ago, 1300 BC, that there was the Exodus event. So that is all there is to say about that. So we see one more time what God, the true author of the scriptures, said 3,300 years ago, recorded 3,300 years ago. Only in the 1960s that science finally admitted what God declared thousands of years previously. This should increase our faith in the divinity of the Holy Scriptures, in the divine preservation of the Word of God. That what seems weird, what seems strange, in time will prove to be true. That's it. That's all. I hope you enjoyed this video. Please like, please subscribe. Please put the notification button, press it, and share the video with your friends, family, on Facebook, Twitter, whatever. All right, that's it. That's all, and I will see you next time. Bye-bye.